Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video on parallel and perpendicular lines. So by the end of this video, you should be able to tell if I give you two lines, whether they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither. And you should also be able to use this to find the equation of a line. So let's look at the definitions. It turns out two lines will be parallel if m1 equals m2. So this is saying m means gradient. If the gradient of the first line is equal to the gradient of the second line, if the gradients are equal, the lines are parallel. The lines are perpendicular if the two gradients multiply to -1, and this here says essentially the same thing. So let's look at an example in which we determine whether or not the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So let's start by looking at these two lines, y equals 5 plus x and y equals 5 minus x. So to determine whether they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither, I need to identify their gradients. So because both are in the form y equals, the gradient's just the number in front of x. So the gradient of this first line, m1, is equal to 1. The gradient of the second line, this one here, the number in front of x is -1. So these lines are not parallel because the gradients aren't equal, but they are perpendicular because 1 times -1 is -1. The two gradients multiply to -1, so therefore the two lines are perpendicular. Okay, let's look at another example that's slightly harder. So let's look at these two lines. So we need to first determine their gradients before we can tell whether they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So the gradient of the second line is really easy to find. It's just the number in front of x. So that gradient is 3/2. But if we look at the first line, a lot of people would think the gradient is 2 because that's the number in front of x, but it isn't. The gradient is the number in front of x only when it's y equals something. So if I want to find the gradient of this line here, I have to rearrange so y is the subject of the equation. So what I'm going to do is subtract 2x from both sides, then divide each side by 3. So 6 divided by 3 and minus 2x divided by 3. So the gradient of this first line is actually minus 2/3. So 3/2 times minus 2/3 also equals -1. So these lines are again perpendicular. So if the two gradients were equal, they would have been parallel, but they multiply to -1, so they're perpendicular. So now let's look at using this to find the equation of a line. So let's do these questions here. Let's look at the first one. So we're going to find the equation of the line perpendicular to y equals 2x that passes through -4 minus 4. So we're going to use the same steps that we did when we were finding the equation that passed through 2 points. So the first step is to find m. It's just that finding m, we won't use the 2-point formula because we don't have 2 points. We'll just use what we know about parallel and perpendicular lines. So the gradient of this second line here is going to be -1 divided by the gradient of the first line. So the gradient of this first line here is just 2, the number in front of x, because it's in the form y equals something. Number in front of x is the gradient. So any line perpendicular to that, its gradient will be -1/2 or -1/2. So now what we need to do is find b. So remember, the way we do that is we take our equation y equals mx plus b, because any line can be written in that form, and what we're going to do is substitute m, the gradient, for the number we just found, and then we substitute x and y as values from the point. Here we only have 1 point. So I'm going to substitute x and y both for -4. So now I'm just going to clean this up a bit. So I get -4 equals now -1/2 times -4 is +2. Now I just subtract 2 from both sides. So b is -6. So the equation of the line perpendicular to y equals 2x that passes through -4 minus 4 is y equals mx plus b. Y equals -1/2x minus 6. Okay, we're done. Let's look at this second question here. So find the equation of the line parallel to 2x minus 4y equals 10 that passes through this point 3, 7. So any line parallel to this line will have the same gradient. So the gradient of this line isn't It isn't the number in front of x because it's not in the form y equals something. So to find the gradient, I have to rearrange this equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides and then divide each side by -4. So I get minus 2.5. Now minus 2x divided by -4 is positive a half x. So this line here has gradient positive a half. So any line parallel will also have gradient equal to positive a half. So that's the first step done. I found that the gradient of any line parallel to this will have gradient half. So now I'm going to find b in the same way. The only difference between these two questions is how I found the gradient. So now I know the gradient is a half. This time it's positive a half. I rub it out and put half. And again, I'm going to substitute x and y as values from the point. So the point I was given was 3, 7. So I'll substitute y 7 and x for 3. So cleaning this up, I get 7 equals 3 over 2 plus b. Subtract 3 over 2 from both sides, I get b equals 5.5. So the hard work's done. The equation is y equals mx plus b. You can write as 5.5 or 11 over 2. It doesn't matter. So we are done. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.